Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Today we're here for a very special occasion. Uh, I we're here to talk about the life of a man and the ideas that he defended. And I'd like to uh, have people come in. Uh, we're going to be talking about Charlie Kirk and his passing, and give um, my own credit to him. You know, in honor of him, I'm going to be presenting today a presentation that I sort of came up with about freedom of speech and the importance of dialogue in this time now more than ever. Some people are saying that right now is represents the end of discussion, the end of dialogue. Like what point is dialogue really? What's the point in freedom of speech if the other side wants to kill you, right? But I think that it's important now more than ever to be a place where discourse can happen, as opposed to the universities and a lot of these online social media platforms like Twitter or Reddit or Discord or whatever. Like, we need places where we can be, yeah, we can have discussions, we can have debates without this guillotine of left-wing violence and big tech censorship hanging over our heads. But before we begin, and I know that there are several people in the back here that I've invited ready to come on and give their 2 cents as we have this discussion. I'd like to give a prayer for Charlie Kirk and his family and for America. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. And may the souls of the faithful departed through the mercy of God rest in peace. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. All right. Now I'm going to have on two of my friends. One an old friend, and one is a new friend. Say hello there, Ben McLean and Scurvy Rum. Which one of you wants to introduce yourselves first?
I think.
I'll
let you. Actually, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Oh, okay. I'm Ben McLean. I am a. I used to make philosophy videos from a pretty right-wing perspective. I have like a series on C.S. Lewis's The Abolition of Man, and another series on fallacy theory in argumentation. And I have kind of been out of doing YouTube videos probably since around when COVID started. So this is me sort of coming back for the first time after a really, really long break. So I'm kind of excited to get back to talking about current events and really mourn the passing of Mr. Kirk.
Pleasure to meet you.
And what about you, Scurvy?
The name's Scurvy Rum. I am a VTuber. I talk about basically whatever's on my mind, whether it's for my videos or it's for my streams. I basically do this as like a hobby. And let's see. And then in terms of in regards of Christianity. I'm going to be baptized Orthodox in a few weeks, actually. So I'm looking forward to that. I've been exploring the faith, getting back into it ever since last June, and I'm excited to see where this journey is gonna go. I've met some wonderful people like Will and some of my Christian VTuber pals. I am an edgelord. I'll say that. I have a very edgy sense of humor, but I'm going to behave myself because that's the polite thing to do. But I just talk about like whatever is like on my mind. Like my most recent video is about like the fall of the SCP Foundation and why its alternative is just better.
All right.
Wait a second. There is an alternative to the SCP Foundation that is better. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the RPC Authority. It really got its it actually got pretty good over these past few years, and
I haven't checked in on it in years, so I might have to follow up.
Yeah, the SCP Foundation has just been going further downhill, especially since like 2018. That's kind of the pivotal point where things started to really go downhill.
Yeah, I don't want to distract with that topic, but that's actually really interesting. That you'd you'd have such an interesting topic. So
yeah, I'm sorry, I muted myself so I could let you guys talk, but I linked both Ben's channels and Scurvy Rum's channel in the I didn't do it right away. Okay, let me put it this. I'm gonna link them both. I linked them both in the comments. Comments below, so okay. So this is so I linked Ben McLean's channel. Now I'm gonna link Scurvy Rum's channel in the here. There. Yeah, that should work. Yeah, so
I think I know of a good question to start with. Maybe and that is, what did each of us know about Charlie Kirk before this event?
That's a pretty good question to start out with. I'll give my own story, and then because I used to be a part of Turning Point USA back when I was in college, and then I first heard about him on my college campus. Going in there, I wanted to join because I was a young conservative, very much full of fire. This would have been back in 2015 or so. I was so, well, let me put it to you this way. I was very angry at the left wing, having been a former leftist who had experienced a lot of the hatefulness and violence that you see currently going on right now. And I wanted pushback. I wanted someone to represent me. And here was Charlie Kirk. Here was Turning Point USA, an organization whose ideology really appealed to me at the time. It was very much pro-freedom of speech, pro-free markets, pro-America, pro-gun rights, and so on. I got all their pamphlets. I went to some of the meetings. I will be honest, I didn't really enjoy the meetings too much because I didn't, I was very awkward as a college student. I wasn't very personable. And so I only went to a couple of meetings and then I kind of fell out of it. Like I fell out of a lot of different groups. I was not as social as I was back in the day. And well, later on, by the 2020s, I had grown to I had grown to move away from a lot of Charlie Kirk's opinions on America and free markets. The main thing being that I, as a social conservative, felt that the state should be more involved in policing and regulating degenerate behavior in the public sphere. And Charlie Kirk's very libertarian attitude towards it seemed like the wrong idea. And I also had been growing skeptical of a lot of America's foreign policy decisions. And Charlie Kirk was very much in favor of rah rah, go America, the kind of rhetoric that you would see coming out of the Daily Wire or Ben Shapiro. And then on top of that, as I grew in my Catholic faith, I was more sympathetic to someone like Nick Fuentes, because there were some people like Classical Theist, who I was friends with, who would be more in that camp. And so you see the thumbnail of my video is of a political cartoon of this era, and which was essentially, there was a moment where Nick Fuentes's fans, as well as fans of E. Michael Jones, would come up there and sort of get asked questions that Charlie Kirk could not answer. Like, for all of his intelligence and rhetoric, Charlie Kirk could not answer these hard-hitting questions about America's relationship with Israel, or why Charlie Kirk was so pro-immigration, and so on. And I think that moment really changed Charlie Kirk. I don't think he wanted to ever admit that these people were right. But at the same time, I think because he was so plugged into what young people were, what young people believed, that what young people wanted, that he had to adjust his approach, that he had to change his public opinions on these issues like immigration, or else he would just lose the vast majority of people. I mean, one of the things that was pointed out by about Turning Point back then was that Facebook memes from Turning Point USA were more popular with people over the age of 50 than they were with young people. So yeah, that was, and I think I always saw Charlie Kirk as someone that I would prefer to debate, like someone who if I could invite on to my channel, and we'd have a discussion, and hopefully end in a friendly way. But I'm that kind of guy. I like debating. I like being sort of challenging other people's opinions on these things. And losing him, it kind of goes to show that, you see, I'd always known that leftism was evil in a lot of ways, that that there's this kind of core of evil to leftism. But Charlie Kirk's death, and then the reaction to it from people, was very telling. It kind of hit me in a way that hadn't other things hadn't before. And it just kind of harkened back to the very reason why I left leftism in the first place. And that, I think that's sort of galvanizing me much more. I think I feel more invigorated. I know I spent a year burnt out of politics. I think it was the entire year of 2023, I think. 2023, 2024, where I just had grown tired of politics, and I just wanted to stay out of it. Well, I'm back. I'm plugged in now, and I don't want to take a break anymore. I don't think I can. With that, I can leave it to Ben. Would you like to have your word?
Well, I guess I might say that, I knew who Charlie Kirk was. I had made a post just the week before. Um, I wouldn't say I was a fan of Charlie Kirk specifically. I mean, he would have been on a list of names of people that do that kind of thing, going to college campuses, um, holding, these open discussions and debates and so forth, being really effective in persuading the youth and drumming up support for the right wing. But also at the same time, he also shared his faith, which I think he considered more important. But anyways, I had actually done a post where I actually quoted him talking about the revival of Christianity that's currently going on in the United States. And I was criticizing my own religious movement for, why aren't we growing like this? Because we're not. And it was a post about our own internal problems. But, then like the very next week, the guy who I had just quoted as, in the first line of my post from last week gets shot. I'm like, whoa. I can't say that I had like a huge emotional reaction to it like a lot of people have, because I was already kind of I've been angry for years, I've sometimes I let a little too much of that anger out, and I know that my Lord calls me to love my enemies and do good to those who persecute and so forth. The lines. And while that doesn't mean rolling over and letting them rule in a democratic society, it does mean that I don't get to hate them. Okay, I struggle with that. But I've been a really right wing guy my whole life. I never really had a phase of not being like that, and the reason is because I could see the social effects of the process of leftist infiltration. When leftists get into an organization and they corrupt it, and the original purpose for which it served gets turned into activism, and the camaraderie and social support that it used to provide for people is systematically destroyed and broken down. And that leaves people hurt and adrift because that social support system is gone. And they've done that across our whole society, from churches to families to clubs to schools to companies to banks to governments. Every human organization, every fraternity, every what's the feminine version of fraternity? What's the
sorority?
Word? Every sorority, right? And I don't just mean like college fraternity. I mean every brotherhood and sisterhood out there. They infiltrate it and they ruin it. If you give them an inch, they take a mile, and they just do not stop. And it isn't like this is an organized conspiracy. It's more the working out of the inevitable practical conclusions that follow from their basic premises or basic beliefs. But anyways, about Charlie Kirk, though, I'm getting off topic. Charlie Kirk was the debate guy. He was the guy. He was not the guy that you send to escalate societal tensions into armed conflict by training militia. Okay. He was the guy that you send to have a debate and let's talk it out and let's settle things in through the political process. That's who he was. He was the guy for doing that. And that is who they shot. And shooting that guy has a deep symbolic significance. It's much like the Athenians condemning Socrates. It wasn't just a condemnation of Charlie Kirk's particular political stances. It was a rejection of the basic process of settling public issues through peaceful deliberation. That's what this meant. And I think that, I mean, it's hard for me to predict what normies are truly going to react to. I mean, there's a number of things that have already happened that I thought they should, have been up in arms about. But I'm not great at predicting that. But if this was to be the turning point, then my response there would be just sort of finally. But anyways, I'm talking too much. I've made the point about who Charlie Kirk was to me was just one of a long list of guys doing this kind of thing. But and I wasn't especially a big fan of his. But man, I wouldn't have expected him to be the guy that they'd shoot. Like whoever is like an actual white nationalist getting shot. I'd be like, oh, well, yeah, okay. I mean, I kind of could see that happening. You know what I mean? I mean, it would still be bad, but it wouldn't have the kind of impact of shooting the peaceful debate guy, because that's who they shot.
Okay, how about you, Scurvy? And also, I'm going to be adding like a hello there in the private chat, Valor. I'm gonna let's see if I can bring you on stage. Hey, Valor,
Hello?
how are you?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good. How are y'all?
I'm doing
Pretty
well.
good.
So
Good.
yeah, this is one of my new acquaintances, Valor 21. He is an Eastern Orthodox amateur author who is and someone who posts blogs about on Substack that are pretty interesting reads.
Pleasure to make y'all's acquaintance. How are y'all?
Pretty good. Like I said earlier, pretty good.
Good.
Yeah. So I'm going to have Scurvy. What were your thoughts about Charlie Kirk before? How you got to know him and your reaction?
So I did know who Charlie Kirk was. Not all that fondly, if I'm being honest. Even when I was in one of the universities that I went to, I was part of the Young Republicans group or whatever it was called. I forget the exact name. I was vaguely familiar with Kirk, but I was and still kind of listened to Matt Walsh more often. But for me, I didn't really start to learn about his positions until pretty recently, and I didn't exactly like his. I didn't exactly like some of his stances, whether it is politically or theologically. Like I've been looking into orthodoxy for quite some time. It's been a bit over a year now, and I'm going to be getting baptized into it very soon. But I had some problems with some of the theology he was saying, some of the positions that he had, especially in regards to a certain country in the Middle East. But I didn't exactly have a positive view on him, so to speak. At least before what happened to him tragically. So that's basically my thoughts.
What is your reaction now, Scurvy? Like,
in regards to that, it's like I especially on in regards to that country in the Middle East, it's like I did not know that he was actually starting to change his mind on some of this stuff, even to go so far as to just tell Ben Shapiro in his face that of just the stuff that he was starting to notice. So I started to gain a bit more. I started to gain a bit more respect for him, even though it's like at the end of the day, there are still some of those differences. But it's like and then also it's like knowing who he was as a person. It's like I do like him as a person. It seems like he was a good father, a good husband, a good Christian. So I can't complain about like who the man was. It's just some of his stances I disagree with.
And in all honesty, I think he would be more than willing to debate things like that with with
Yeah,
others, given his personality. Like he's,
yeah.
um, hey, so Valor, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about like what your thoughts are about the deceased and your
Absolutely.
reaction to the incident.
So, hey everybody. I'm a friend of Williams. My name is Valor. You guys can call me either Caleb or Lawrence. I'm really not picky, not fussy at all. I met him online because I write articles on philosophy and theology, and I also publish religious and philosophical short stories and poems and stuff like that. I kind of have my own thing, and so on the topic so very good to meet you all. So on his question, one of my biggest gripes about this situation is, so in my introduction to politics was done quite early, like 11, 12, 13. And I got emphatically into the conservative movement. I looked up to people like Stephen Crowder, people like Milo Yiannopoulos, and some people on the Daily Wire. And while I recognize now the shortcomings of those people, yeah, exactly, I know.
I was going to say I'm an old school Ditto head from the 90s.
Yeah, no. So like, so I I was in. By the way, I was exposed to it by people that were that way, like millennials, Gen X, that kind of stuff. And so I was exposed to politics quite early, and it was mainly as an expression of kind of my life story. I'll spare y'all on that. But Charlie Kirk, I was introduced to quite late. I remember 14 to 17, I was in debate. And Charlie Kirk, I wasn't aware of him until I was like 16 and 17. And this time I was kind of knee deep in politics, just getting into debate and religion and stuff like that, and philosophy and theology and stuff like that. So with Charlie Kirk, in his situation, I was introduced quite late in 17. And so seeing him get shot in relation to the state of affairs in politics was very interesting, because I've always thought of him as kind of milquetoast. Like he's not kind of off the cuff and off the wall. And I was more concerned by honestly by I was more concerned by the fact that he was the one being shot, and the shooter's methodology. Like he wrote some things on the bullets and stuff. I don't know if y'all are familiar with that part of the case. Are y'all?
Yes, we are.
I've followed it pretty close.
Yeah. So so when I converted, long story, not even going to talk about it. I became kind of not like a moderate, not like kind of like I'm above it all. Absolutely not. I think Christ is politics. Like Christ is the way that we should relate to other people. And while I would disagree with the state getting involved in any way other than to maximize virtue in the populace, not as like a head of, not like as a head of a religious body. I do think that one of the most striking things is that they wrote Bella Ciao on the bullet, on one of the bullets. And I laughed at the irony of that, because before it was about killing Mussolini, like before it was the partisan anthem of the Italian partisans during World War II, it was actually a song that was sung by rice field workers. It wasn't a song about killing people or war. It was a song about wounds and being crushed under the foot of a tyrant. And I found that to be quite ironic that he was using that as justification to shoot a man in the face. I recognize the fact because I was very tempted later down the line in my life, because of how I grew up, which I won't explain, to progressivism. It was a very big temptation to me, but I started to notice that it was not about the love of the poor. Like my heart is, weeps for people that are in that position. And my heart weeps for those people, but I recognize now that Christ is the only answer to that. And I found it. And so I recognize like the philosophy of progressivism takes advantage of that. And conservatism kind of accidentally overcorrects in reaction to it. And this has been talked about by dialectical thinkers such as Marx and stuff. And Marxism is so diabolical and progressivism is so diabolical because it takes advantage of the wounds that are caused by kind of overly zealous conservatism, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on it. I just thought Charlie Kirk was so like, middle of the road, and seeing him get shot and compared to people like Mussolini is really goes to show like how, progressivism definitely takes advantage of that, if that makes sense. Anyway, that's done with my TED Talk. I just wanted to say that.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Well, I think all of us can agree that, and I think this is something that I forgot who said this, but in a lot of ways, Charlie Kirk represented mainstream American conservatism. Good, the average Trump supporter.
Yeah.
And that hits me in a lot of ways because I'm not a big fan of Donald Trump. I don't personally like how he changed the Republican Party into being more of a pro-choice party. I don't like a lot of his foreign policy decisions, even if I agree with some of them. There are some that really get under my skin. But I have a deep and personal love for Donald Trump supporters because those are my family. Those are my kin. Those are the people I work with every day. And, I work with a few liberal types in my everyday life, and I do things with them. So it's not like I have a lack of brotherhood towards them. But, when people say that they hate Donald Trump supporters and hate normie conservatives, I can't help but feel like they're talking about my family. And that hits something that hits hard. That hits hard for me. And, that kind of contempt, it's not unique to progressivism. I've seen like some hard right people on Twitter talk about the average average normie conservative with that kind of hatred. But the thing is, progressives take it to a whole new level.
Oh yeah,
Because with the hard right account, the right-wing accounts on Twitter, most of them are just expressing their contempt out of frustration. Like, why aren't you as radical as I am? Don't you see that you're being oppressed? Why can't you be like me? That is the message that I hear from them.
It's a matter of self-relation rather than something that actually cares about the situation, is what I've noticed.
Mm-hmm.
It's trying to build fraternity for people that are genuinely hurt and being, just taken advantage of by progressivism. And I will tell you that, like, the way that I think about it is conservatives aren't conservatives to me. They're people who are conservative. Like, before they're anything, they're made in the image of God. But that image of God is obviously ravaged by sin and stuff. And so progressives and conservatives do this in a different way, which I won't explain, but Marxism and socialism and stuff and all of that strand of like the main people who are talking about, this kind of killing and stuff. The way that their philosophy works is it's never about truth to them. Karl Marx writes in the Communist Manifesto that they don't believe in the truth and that the truth is the creation of the bourgeoisie. He took that from Hegel, like the Master of History, Minerva's Owl, all that kind of stuff, right? And so But he uses that to create a revolutionary philosophy. Marxism and socialism never cared about the poor. It only cares about the revolution and creating the paradise, so then they can care about the poor. And it's a religion. Like Marxism is a religion. It has a telos of man, it has a soteriology, and it has an eschatology. That's like, I would call it not religion, it's theology is what I would say, because there's one truth, I guess.
Right. So and that kind of goes into what I really wanted to talk about today, which was this is going to be my presentation that I'm going to have, where I created a little presentation like this in honor of Charlie Kirk, where I would basically talk about I'm going to be talking about freedom of speech and what I consider to be a natural law defense of the idea of free expression, and discussing, and it's rooted, unsurprisingly, in our duty towards the truth. You know, here on this channel, we like to talk about applied ethics. We like to talk about you know, and which encompasses a large number of things, including politics and religion. And I think this is pertinent not just to my channel, but also to the wider conversation happening in the culture, where if you don't have, my thesis for this essay is that this is a major part of our tradition, and it's also important for the culture and important for us ethically. Now, any of you want to stay on for that, I'd be happy to. But you know, if any of you want to go return to go backstage, feel free to. All right, it's all right. Yeah, as you could probably tell, I'm rather new to this format where I'm having on a bunch of guests at the same time, and so hopefully I don't make a mistake with this. Yeah, so I create this is my first slide, right? So the prerequisite knowledge, I give some of my definitions before I make the argument. So one of the things about a moral right, if we're talking about a moral right, that means it's moral and right for the government to uphold and defend this ability to do a thing. It's like a moral permission that people have, and that needs to be recognized by the wider society. It's not the same thing as like a right in the sense that the state just happens to recognize it. Like there are plenty of countries in which there is no freedom of speech, but the idea of a moral right is just, it's a part of ethics. It's something that the government should do. It should protect people's freedom of speech, for example. It should protect the life of the right to life. It should protect the right to property, and so on and so forth. And so then we have synderesis. This is the basic ability to recognize the difference between good and evil. And this is what makes moral judgments possible, and it's a natural power of the human intellect. Basically, every person has within them the capacity to recognize the difference between good and evil. If they didn't have this, ethics wouldn't be possible. And then we have the first axiom of the natural law, which is good is to be pursued and done, and evil avoided. This is axiomatic. It can't really be argued against, because if you're trying to argue, why can't we be? You might have some moral skeptic who argues, why should we be good? Why can't we just be evil? Well, even someone like that understands that there are some things that are beneficial for them, some things that they want to happen, things that they don't want to happen, things that are not beneficial for them. And in that very loose sense, they agree that good is to be pursued and done and evil avoided, even if they define good and evil purely in terms of self benefit. And next we have the primary precepts of the natural law, which are the sort of fundamental principles derived from the combination of the first axiom applied to human nature. So we have basic moral truths that are self-evident to anybody who understands human nature. Things like one must preserve one's own life, or we have a duty to raise children, or our duty to know the truth, live in society, and worship God. Things like that. They follow from knowledge of human nature and what we are. And then finally, there are the secondary precepts, which are not self-evident because they're derived from the primary precepts, and it consists of application of these things. And this is where you'll find moral rights. Things like human rights would basically belong to the secondary precepts. So any questions so far?
Nope. Not on my end.
I don't have anything.
Okay,
I mean, I have a small question, I guess.
Mhm.
It's really just based on the thing that you said about the primary precepts of the natural law. I would argue that moral skepticism doesn't exactly exist. I would just think that moral skepticism is something related to the decay of the ability to understand right and wrong, whether this is abuse that they've suffered, or it's a kind of willingness or a will towards sin in some way. That's my only point, because if you start thinking that, like, if we all ran on like this idea of basic utility, that, like, you want something, or that it would be beneficial for someone, then you start to have to ask the question on what exactly is beneficial. And certainly those things are by no means material unless they ultimately serve good ends. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, I definitely agree with that. Right. This is why we say that the primary precepts are self-evident, because the only reason why you would disagree with these is if you don't have a clear idea in your mind of what is human nature. If you have if your idea of human nature is radically at odds with reality, then of course you're going to have very different understanding of what are the primary precepts of the natural law.
Well,
but
the thing about the natural law is that it is experienced intuitively rather than being postulated like this. So where another philosopher might disagree with you would be a different statement of the postulates that has a different emphasis. But he would, I think, generally, if he's a natural law theorist, would be trying to get to the same conclusion as you, but he might have different postulates.
Yes, and I would argue that a lot of the inability to or the inability to see the natural law in terms of reality is not necessarily always like a malicious attempt at self-relation. Sometimes it's kind of just a habit that they formed, or it's related to their own sin and inability to act upon those precepts. And the reason that I say that is because a lot of people, when they have this discussion, like to say that when people do evil things, right, that it is an inability to see the natural law, but it is not always a willing, malicious attempt at breaking the natural law. The person can be influenced by a variety of factors. And I always say that because if we think of it in terms of them just not choosing to do it, we neglect the factors that make them make the bad choice. And while those things, by the way, do not justify the action, they do help us understand the phenomenon. That's what I say.
Okay. All right. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I would just say that primary precepts are relatively self-evident. They're self-evident relative to your knowledge of human nature, and this is it. And human nature is experienced, through everyday living. Like you're around humans, you get an idea for what human nature is like. That's all that I would say.
Yeah.
All right,
Well, what I'm saying is not, there will be people who won't just wholesale completely disagree with you and assert the opposite, but instead there would be people who would say, no, justice is the fundamental axiom, or another person would say, no, actually, utility is the fundamental axiom, or and rather than going from natural law, they'd go from some particular moral principle as their postulate, and that's not just a flat out denial of right and wrong. I'm just saying there's been a lot of different. We've been living with this, since the days of Plato, trying to analyze the natural law and come up with postulates for it. And so what I'm not saying you're wrong, but what I'm saying is lots of people have approached this problem and they've come up with different postulates, and some of them are good Christians as well. Just saying.
Yo, yeah.
Right.
I would agree with that.
All right. Yeah. Let's see. Going to the next slide. So here, I just lay out a very basic argument for natural rights, and this is more based on a Thomistic understanding, which roots natural rights in the dignity that we have as sharing in the common good of society. What does that mean? Well, as members, we are members of a society as our different body parts are members of the same body, and we all contribute to the same common good of that society. We have a common end that we're all working towards as members of the society, and the good of the whole is the same thing, is a personal good as well. That means the common good is not an individual good, in that it's not just the good of one person, but it is a personal good, in that it belongs to each one of us. A good example of this would be something like language, right? Language is we share the same English language, and it's ours. It shapes us and it defines us, and it belongs to us. But it's not something, and it belongs to each person too. It's not something that it's not like a collective that we share. It belongs to each person individually. But at the same time, it also is shared among many without being divided. It's not like a giant pizza whose slices are shared. It belongs to all of us at the same time. The common good is spiritual in that sense. And so when we have now, here's the thing, right? The dignity of others is built on the idea that since we're all parts of the same body, to reject one person in dignity is like rejecting a part of the body. It's as if we as hands would reject the heart or the eyeball or some other part of the body, because I don't know, because it's different, because we don't like it or something. But all of the different parts contribute to the whole, so it doesn't really make sense for a part to reject another part. And the and now part of the respecting of other people's dignity is to allow them to pursue what is good for them. Because here's the thing, ought implies can. If I'm obligated to act in a certain way, then I have a moral right to do so. And so if you do not allow others to pursue what is good for them in a moral sense, then you're not respecting in their dignity as a person. You're essentially treating them as being less than human. You are telling them what is good for you does not matter for me. But that doesn't make sense because, again, the hand telling the eyes you are worthless, or the foot telling the stomach I have no use for you, doesn't really make sense because you're all contributing to the same common good. And if you're and by doing this, you're impeding the pursuit of the common good, which hurts yourself and it hurts those around you. And this is why we have natural rights in the sense that you have a moral permission to do things. This is why we're obligated to respect them. This is sort of a natural law understanding of this concept. Any questions?
Is this the same or different from Martin Luther King's argument in Letter from Birmingham Jail?
I imagine that there might be some crossover. I mean, Martin Luther King Jr. was taking ideas from St. Thomas, yes.
Well, that was my only question.
Okay. That's fair enough.
The only thing I would ask is one of the ways that I like to ground this argument for people who, if any of you guys aren't Thomists, this argument absolutely makes sense in the context of in the context of like Orthodox incarnational theology, right? If human beings by their very nature are created in the image of God, and that is an ontological state in which they are in perpetually, then I can make the same argument, pretty much the exact same one, by saying that human beings due to this are all axiologically equal. Or in other words, they all have the same worth, regardless of their sickness or their personal sin, or even in, not in really in this case, but including in this case, of their nationality and stuff like that, right? This is the reason why a lot of racial arguments don't really fall, is because if a human being has this ontology, in a sense, then to deprive them of this axiological worth would also be, in essence, depriving them of the ability to will what they ought to, right? Or to, in other words, to will Christ. And they have to make that decision, but to deny them of that dignity is honestly to deny them of the ability to choose, because in that denial, you wound them and you make it harder for them to will that good, if that makes sense. Is that okay? Does that make sense?
Now, Now here's where things get interesting. Things get interesting when things get controversial. So here's where things get interesting.
Ooh, do tell.
I would analyze our present society as having indulged in an excess of too much egalitarianism.
Yes,
rather than as being insufficiently egalitarian. And so while we could say that all souls are equal in the eyes of God, what we mean by equal worth really does need to be carefully defined, because I don't think it is reasonable to assert that people must be treated equally in all circumstances all the time, no matter who they are or what they've done, because that that would not make sense, and that would not be in accordance with the truth of human nature.
I agree with that, but the way that argument holds is not based in, you know, arbitration, or sorry, in the arbitrary. It's based in their ontology, whether that's their genetic dispositions, their temperament, the ontology of their gender and their personality. And yes, while I do think that egalitarianism is something to uphold, when egalitarianism becomes a problem is when it further it further wounds people, either knowingly or unknowingly, in ignorance or not, in order to cause them to sin. And in that kind of sinful decay, it makes people unable to search for that, you know, idea of natural law. And so I agree with that. I would very much argue that it is based in ontological characteristics rather than very arbitrary characteristics. Like, you couldn't really use, unless you're talking genetic predisposition or something, which is kind of fickle to begin with, you couldn't really ground this in race or something along those lines, or even temperament in the realms of masculinity and femininity, or even from the. And while I do think there's an argument to be made about gender in ontology, and it is a very, very core ontology, I think those ideas can be, you know, hashed out on those lines. But I would very much hesitate to I would very much ask the ontological argumentation to be made for, in constraining egalitarianism, to not leave out a margin. That's kind of what I would say is
okay. Yeah. So I mean, it's the analogy I use is the same as St. Paul says. The eye cannot say to the hand, "I have no need for you," nor again the head to the feet, "I have no need for you." On the contrary, the members of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable, and those members of the body we think less honorable, we clothe with greater honor, and our less respectable members are treated with greater respect. Whereas our more respectable members do not need this, but God has so arranged the body, giving the greater honor to the inferior member, that there may be no dissension within the body, but the members may have the same care for one another. If one member suffers, all suffer with it. If one member is honored, all rejoice together with it. That's the basic idea that we're talking about here. And that is one that natural rights, I think, is based on. So going to the next slide here, we have sort of the natural law argument for freedom of speech here, which is the idea here is that let me see. Oh wait, natural right. Okay, yeah. So I define natural right to freedom of speech as the ability to express one's opinions without censorship. So if I have a natural right to freedom of speech, then I can share thoughts and opinions, either verbally or in writing, without fear of legal consequences or violent retribution. And so and I move on to the next slide here, which gives my basic argument for there being a natural right to freedom of speech. The first premise is to know the truth is one of the primary precepts of the natural law. So we have a duty towards truth. And the second premise is that human beings possess the faculty of speech, whose purpose is the communication of truth. And the third premise is interpersonal communication about what is true or not, i.e. dialectic, is one of the primary ways we obtain truth. Without dialectic, we have no way of comparing our differing opinions. Therefore, a natural right that protects dialectic from censorship must exist so that people can fulfill their duty towards the truth and this right is called a right to free speech. Does that make sense, guys, or do you have any like criticisms of this?
I have
that makes
only.
sense.
Oh yeah, you go.
I was just gonna say, like, for me personally, I think this is what I think. For me, I'm not a free speech absolutist. I think in the realms of politics, I'd rather not my enemies have the right to speak in regards to the realm of politics. But when it comes to like just like ordinary street life, it's like you should be able to say, for the most part, like what you want. And because again, that in that kind of realm of just like the bar or the tavern, it's like, yeah, you're just kind of shooting the shit, and you're just you're just having a conversation with your friends, and you shouldn't face persecution because you said a wrong thing to your friend who you're having a discussion with.
Well,
So
I might want
I think it applies to. I think freedom of speech applies to like certain realms, but definitely not all realms.
Yeah,
Well,
there
I
always
mean,
have to be some limits, and
Yeah.
that's the critical issue right now in America. What are the
I mean,
limits?
we're going to get to like the limits on freedom of speech in the next slide, but I might want to push back on the Scurvy. How do you know? Even if we grant that the enemies, however we define them, shouldn't have freedom of expression, how do you know that they aren't right? They don't happen to be right on one issue, and you happen to be wrong. How would you know that if you didn't talk to them?
In regards to that, I will define I guess enemy in this case being just like the rabid leftists who think who think it's morally okay to just to basically dance on someone's grave because they didn't like that person.
Okay,
I
well,
don't think crazy people like that should be listened to, and I don't think I think really something like that, someone like that, kind of belongs in a padded cell. But that's just me.
I think
I don't think
I,
they're gonna have anything worth listening to because they also clearly lack just like some basic morals. And I think it's like if you can't even if all your moral code is just the acquisition of power and nothing more, nothing less, it's like yeah, I can like that will get in the way of trying to run a functional, stable country.
I would.
Yeah, I have
would
another thing to
contest-
bring up before the next slide too. Just
I've been I wanted to just slightly like just slightly push back on two things. One of the things that one of the things that becomes kind of an issue is mainly point 3. And I'll push back on Scurvy's thing in just a second, but I would say that that as far as point 3 goes, there is a difference between like conversation, like ordinary dialectic, right, and the imminent critique and Marxist dialectic. The way that their philosophy works is they want pushback. The way that Marxism works is from the perspective of class struggle rather than any attempt at truth. It is something that directly takes advantage of, as Scurvy pointed out, it directly takes advantage of pushback. Now, the question obviously arises on what to do about that. Obviously, I would naturally disagree with the idea that banning their speech will do anything other than embolden them, because they want us to be mad. Like, they want us not to forgive them, and they want the antithesis, quote unquote. I know that's Fichte, that's not Hegel or Marx, but bear with me. They want us to ban their speech. And I think we often forget when talking about this that even conservatives, even if you're conservative and you're chasing even if you're chasing the natural good, that doesn't mean the other person does. Now now I would argue, however, against Scurvy's point that to define the state as the axiomatic good would be the only way that you could justify free speech, and I would argue that is absolutely wrong, because Christ is and he is beyond nation.
Well,
And
yes.
free speech is kind of supposed to
finish.
mitigate dialectic. Anyway, keep going.
I was also gonna say, it's like we already basically have the guide work for what is moral and what it is and what isn't, and that would be the Bible, the gospel, and the Old Testament, the New Testament. We already have a pretty good moral framework that civilizations have used for a long time now. We see that it has positive effects, and now compare that with Marxism, and if you compare the impact that Christianity had throughout history and compare that to Marxism, the difference is night and day. That's why I think it's just better to, if you're in if you're trying to run a functional country, you shouldn't pay the Marxists any attention. They are clearly just people who just want to destroy things on quite literally a false premise of class equality or whatnot. They don't have any sort of intentions of fixing it. They just want to they basically just want to destroy for the sake of destruction.
Hey,
That's
so
kind of
Scurvy,
it's nihilist. It's insanely nihilistic,
but
and I don't think nihilism
Scurvy,
is a good thing to listen to.
okay, but but Scurvy, I would like to, just leaving Marxists aside, and we'll get to them in a moment. What if you had an enemy that did sincerely believe in the truth, but it was but they were opposed to you nonetheless?
Good question. I'll have to get back to you on that.
Yeah, this is sorry, Ben, go on.
Oh, it's just me.
I
okay.
do have a thing, but
yeah,
I'll wait, for my turn.
No, he can, Ben, you can go.
All right, so I don't, I'm assuming you want us on here because you want us to bring up potential problems here. All right,
Okay,
so
yeah, fair enough.
So I think we need to be thinking about the context of this argument and this term protect. What does protect really mean? Who's doing the protecting? Is this protection active or passive? And in order for people to have freedom of speech, there are certain preconditions that have to be met. For example, you have to be allowed to be in the country at all. Does freedom of speech mean we have to guarantee freedom of speech to the whole world so that we are obligated to go over to Iran or Saudi Arabia or North Korea or the Congo and conquer it so that the people there will have free speech? Is that what protection means? I mean, this goes into a whole, there's a whole world of policy issues that's this one word protect, opens up, So I think we would need to, rather than just accepting something as general as this, I think we would want to get a lot more specific to the extent to which, every right has a corresponding obligation, and the obligation that this creates, we would have to be a lot more specific about before I would just accept this argument. You see what I'm saying?
Oh, of course, yes. So let me be more specific. I think I defined before that a moral right would be something that a nation needs to recognize with regards to its own people, and the people within a nation or within a polity would need to respect for each other. It doesn't, when it comes to nations dealing with other nations, the key here is prudence, right? So would it be prudent to invade some other country for the sake of giving people in that country freedom of speech? I would say 9 out of 10 times no, for very obvious reasons, being that it seems like something. Well, I mean, on an intuitive level, it just seems something that's real radically ideologically possessed.
Well, also,
Um,
it's probably not possible to do. Ought
yeah,
implies
that's
can, so can't implies that not ought.
yeah, that's exactly what that's exactly the kind of principle that we're talking about here. When it comes to there's also the fact that just because there is a nation that isn't 100% moral, that doesn't give you a right to overthrow the government. Generally speaking, generally speaking, just on a moral level, we as Christians recognize the legitimacy of different governments, even non-Christian governments.
But
Given
this does have us making a distinction between peoples. Some people being ours and some people being not ours, and some territory being ours and some territory being not ours, which is most definitely not contained in the natural law, but depends on real history.
that is true, yeah, I mean that is true. However, I mean, there's nothing in the natural law that says that this is wrong, that peoples are separated from each other into different polities. This is just a natural state of affairs that we've had to deal with for a long time. Um, what we what we recognize, though, is that there is such a thing as objective morality, and a state that does a better state would do X, Y, and Z, and the states that don't do the kinds of things we would they are morally obligated to do are not as good as states that do the things they are morally obligated to do. If
So
that
what we
makes
have
sense.
here then is a standard for evaluating different nations and systems of government as better or worse than one another, and not
Yes.
necessarily an absolute universal obligation that we're creating when we talk about this right.
Well, that's a good. We would say. I would just say a moral obligation to for this right. How would you when it comes to nations policing other nations? That we have to recognize that all nations are in some ways equal to one another, in that they each have a duty to look out for the common good of the people, and thereby they have the right to govern those people. And unless it's we have just cause, as in a just war case, we're not going to go to war for them just because they do not follow what we would consider to be the moral law.
Yeah, well, I was just trying to say this argument here would need a limiting principle on it, or else, the way it reads, just taking it flat right off the page, it would indicate a really heavy universal obligation. Depending on what this protects and means, So I was just pointing that out as an issue to be aware of with this argument. I'm not just saying we have to completely solve everything tonight, because that's not how the philosophy works.
Well, I mean, when it comes to natural rights are part of the secondary precept of the natural law, and in the secondary precepts are not self-evident, in my opinion. And also in the opinion of someone like St. Thomas, we would not consider to be and oftentimes the secondary precepts consist of applications of the primary precepts to specific times and places. So what implementing let's even assume for the sake of argument that there is this absolute right to freedom of expression. Well, what that looks like, applying that to a poor country in some other part of the world, is not the application of that moral principle to that country is going to look different to how we apply it here in America, if that makes sense.
I wanted to just butt in. I'm so sorry. I just wanted to butt in to mention in the case of this argument, right? One of the points that I think the Scurvy has brought up and the chat has brought up is the fact that in the context of what we're talking about, borders, like in the case of national, we are doing this in the context of a polity, right? And yes. America and the way that I think we should think about national identity and safeguarding these natural rights is not from the perspective of nations, unless you get way more specific, nations having to do with the ontology of the people in it. However, I do think that borders need to be able to need to exist in order to contain the space of people that interact with the polity so that they can be healed through edification. And the reason that this argument gets so slippery is the fact that in the context of our nation, right, the reason that it's so hard to deal with is that one side is demanding the annihilation of the other, and the other in reaction wants to quell it. And by that very axiom, right? By that very axiom, we're looking at a very, very dire gun. We're kind of staring down the barrel of what makes those nations different is the fact that they've corrupted themselves with whether it's sin of individual people so much in the context of government, which leads to disastrous consequences when it comes to the people of said nation. And I say that only because it's very, very prevalent in this case. I know there's a lot of anger and want to quell the other side, but while I do think that Marxism and this dialectical disease, this epistemological disease that is progressivism needs to be quelled, I would hesitate to say that this can be healed by any sense of, policy decision. This starts with a virtuous populace. This starts with people in communion with God.
We don't have a virtuous population.
We don't. That's why it's so scary. Is you have to institute that before you have to institute that, and that's why we're looking down this very, very kind of hopeless gun, is because Marxism demands demands anger, right? And it demands an antithesis regardless of the truth. It doesn't care about the truth, and it wants to annihilate the other side. You can read any of the progressive philosophers, and that's what makes them so diabolical. And I would argue that any decision made in the polity has to be done very carefully. And we also kind of have to accept the idea that Christianity in the context of healing these people needs to have a first fidelity to Christ and his commandments, regardless of the person wanting to annihilate you. And I think that's why it's so difficult, is because the natural reaction we want to do is quell it. But if this is the way it works, then it's going to take advantage, whether we like it or not. This kind of like us trying to do it by political or military force or getting rid of free speech and stuff will only embolden further violence. And I know it's I'm not saying that we should be free speech absolutists, and I certainly think that there's a case for slander or libel in this context, but I would very much hesitate to say that the state or the people in the state, regardless of their personal holiness, are in any position to quell it unless they deeply understand the state of what makes progressivism so evil. Does that make sense?
Mm.
It does, but the thing is, and I think there's a key note that I'd like to bring up before I guess we continue on with the, I don't think we want to stay on the same slide for forever, but
Yeah.
the thing is, these people are like, especially the demons that are dancing on the grave of Charlie Kirk. They are very violent individuals. They're looking for any excuse they can to commit violence. They are not like dialogue only goes so far, and this is you might have seen this common sentiment among like a lot of people on the right. In regards to just like these, again, I'm not saying, and I'm not advocating for violence. I'm not advocating for that at all. I have this stance of, it's like, we absolutely do have the right to defend ourselves, though. And when you have these people who don't want to talk, who only want to try to basically use force for immoral ends, they like, what is okay? Let me think. Sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought in the middle of it. Happens sometimes.
Hey,
I think you're jumping ahead actually to what will be on the future slides.
One of the future slides will go over the limitation on freedom of speech, the limits of freedom of speech, and it'll directly cover what we're talking about. But I want to give Ben the last word because he has a quote from Russell Kirk, a different Kirk.
Right. So just so you know what I meant earlier when I said that every right comes with an obligation. A right, enables someone to do something, but in so doing, it always restricts someone else. Every right does that. And this quote comes from Russell Kirk's book, The Conservative Mind, From Burke to Eliot, from 1985. He says, quote, "Radicalism at the end of the 18th century expressed its case in terms of natural rights. Ever since Paine's Rights of Men was published, the notion of inalienable natural rights has been embraced by the mass of men in a vague and belligerent form, ordinarily confounding rights with desires. This confusion in definition plagues society today, notably in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights drawn up by the United Nations Organization. 30 articles and a somewhat greater number of rights defined therein, including the right to free education, the right to enjoy the arts, the right of copyright, the right to an international order, the right to the full development of personality, the right to equal pay, the right to marry, and a great many more, which are actually not rights at all, but merely aspirations. The conservative adage that all radical natural rights are simply, in substance, a declaration of the right to be idle is suggested in Article 3. Everyone has the right to rest and leisure, including reasonable limitation of working hours and periodic holidays with pay. This lengthy catalog of rights ignores the two essential conditions which are attached to all true rights. First, the capacity of individuals to claim and exercise the alleged right. Second, the correspondent duty that is married to every right. If a man has a right to marry, some woman must have the duty of marrying him. If a man has a right to rest, some other person must have the duty of supporting him. If rights are confused thus with desires, the mass of men must always feel that some vast, intangible conspiracy thwarts their attainment of what they are told is their inalienable birthright. Burke, and after him Coleridge, perceiving this danger of fixing upon society a permanent grudge frustration, tried to define true natural right and true natural law. So when I say that if people have a right to freedom of speech, that means that someone else has a duty to provide that protection. and that creates
Yeah.
a big obligation on society.
I would agree with you on that, Ben. I do. I try purposefully to attach rights like freedom of speech to a duty because it provides a limit. One thing that does is it provides a limiting principle to the right, and it doesn't. And by making the duty explicit, and the duty explicit here is that the government recognizes that within a polity, people have a duty towards the truth. People have a duty to pursue truth as an end in itself. And part of that, a major part of that, is dialogue amongst our fellow men. And if we live in fear of violence or censorship or whatnot, then we can't have that dialogue. And this is why the government has the obligation to protect that right, and it also has people have a moral obligation also to recognize the importance of dialogue in pursuit of the truth, and to respect other people's and respect that process.
I
But
do
going
have to
on,
get going, Will, but thanks for having me on.
oh, no problem, Scurvy. Take care.
You too.
Okay. So the limits to freedom of speech, which Scurvy was talking about before. Wrong one. Okay, yeah. Limits to freedom of speech. So according to the Thomistic or scholastic view of natural rights, a natural right is limited by its telos, or end. The uses of the right that go against the natural end are abuses of the right. So I would list just the basic concepts that most liberals would agree with, like things like incitement to illegal action, serious threats of illegal violence, defamation, obscenity. Things like that are not protected by freedom of speech because they all, in their own way, go against. They do harm to ongoing dialogue. If you have, of course, incitement to illegal action or violence, obviously that's not protected speech because threatening people with coercion is kind of goes against a dialogue. It's not some, you can't have a situation where the person says, "Oh, I'm going to have an honest dialogue with you about how much I want to kill you." That doesn't make any sense logically, and you're just using. I mean, and think about how if you're using violence to win an argument, that goes against the spirit of the dialogue, which is about which looks at the merits of the argument rather than just like physical force in order to settle disputes. And then you have, of course, illegal action generally undermines the social order within which dialogue happens, which actually prevents and this is why, generally speaking, even incitement to any kind of illegal action within more or less actually will lead to the downfall of dialogue within a polity. Now, I understand that there are some countries that have laws on the books that are not, that are not just. As a Thomist, I would just say that an unjust law is not a law. So that's the Thomist position on that.
I very much agree with you on that. I was not expecting that from Thomas Aquinas.
Yeah, I mean, Thomas Aquinas literally says an unjust law is not a law, and it's rooted in St. Thomas's understanding that governments get their authority from God and from the natural law. And so if you have a government which purports creates a law that goes against the natural law and therefore God's authority.
God is how, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I
that's
was going to
it.
say, the reason why the Republican Party and the conservative movement have completely embraced Martin Luther King as a sort of secular saint um, is because it's actually not the "I have a dream" speech. It's actually not a lot of the stuff most of the people have actually heard of or read. It's because of the letter from Birmingham jail, because almost everything he says in that letter, he does not make the argument that some of his communist friends might have made about social justice and class warfare and so forth. No, it is all copy pasted straight out of Thomas Aquinas, and he cites Aquinas as well. It's our philosophy that it was our philosophy before Dr. King pointed out that it is in fact our philosophy. It was always our philosophy. And on that point, no matter what else was going on in his life, no matter what bad stuff you want to say about him, no matter what communists were hanging around him or he was hanging around, he was right on that point. And no matter what
I would,
adulteries he was committing, no matter what else you want to say about Dr. King, he
yeah,
was
on that,
correct on that point.
I would not. I would just say, yeah. I mean, it is fascinating. I mean, so Dr. King, he might have been like a liberal Christian who denied the virgin birth of Christ, for example. But he actually did deny. I think he denied the divinity of Christ and the virgin birth, and he also
Oh
claimed
no,
that
yeah, that's bad. Yeah.
he also, he also claimed that he also claimed that Christianity was derived from paganism, which is also very funny. But he would have studied a lot of these things within university. Yeah, I would say he wasn't really a Christian, but the thing is, he's citing Christian ethics actual Christian ethics in favor of his position. And while I would agree with him that, yeah, I mean, while I and most Catholics would agree with him that the kind of racial segregation that was in the American South at the time was not moral. um, I think there was a I think there were some problems with the civil rights movement that we are now experiencing, but I think that's a different topic. But it gets to the point that what I said earlier, that free, sometimes your enemies are correct about a topic, and you want to incorporate and you need to incorporate their good ideas into your overall framework in order to get to the truth. But going back here, I will say that another thing, obscenity and defamation undermine dialectic in different ways. Defamation, lying with malicious intent. That actually does go against the truth. Obviously, lying is the opposite of truth. And then also, obscenity lacks any kind of intellectual or artistic method. Obscenity lacks any kind of intellectual or artistic merit, and so and tries to appeal to humans' base desires, and in doing so, it leads them away from the truth, which is spiritual good.
Yes.
Um,
Can I cut in? I just wanted to mention that something
mhm.
real quick. Okay.
Yeah, go on.
All right. So my apologies. I wanted to mention that like based on like one of the reasons that this becomes so difficult is the connotation that civil rights has is almost completely wrong from what it actually was. In the case of in the case of like this, this obviously being something that was motivated by, leftist paradigms and stuff. There's this idea that, people like, Martin Luther King or Malcolm X, due to the way that we think about it, were either like completely good people or they were all terrible and they were all put in by, they're all terrible or they're all like or they're morally compromised. I would argue in the case of like civil rights is the thing that made, civil rights, right and wrong are for completely different reasons than what people say it was. Like most people bring up that MLK, said a bunch of heretical things. And they also bring up the fact that he absolutely had, genuine moral problems in his life. Whether this was lust, whether this was, a lot of people don't know this, but whether it was lust, whether it was some of the things that he did on the side, related to that kind of stuff. The reason that this is so difficult is because it doesn't recognize the fact that every single person involved in it has the ability to not run on the axiological good, whether through ignorance or the like. And the reason that I bring this up is in the case of this argument that we have on, Martin Luther King, is the fact that the thing that made what civil rights was fighting for wrong is independent of the civil rights movement. It was the fact that axiological worth and human dignity, as we've discussed, whether this is natural rights or is grounded in incarnational theology, like I mentioned, is independent of the ails or the evils of the civil rights movement. And any attempt of the civil rights movement to reinstitute this is true. Any attempt to insert Marxism is bad. This is independent of the fact that, their wants for equality is independent of their heretical views. And I would argue that civil rights in the context of the time period that it was in is absolutely people were deprived of their value in accordance to God. They were deprived of, I've read Ida Tarbell, I've read a lot of the way behind, proto-civil rights thinkers. And they're not like Malcolm X. Like they're not like super radical in that regard that they want to destroy all the white institutions. It was the fact that segregation in itself was built on that axiological deprivation. And progressivism absolutely overcorrected when they allowed Marxists to sway that opinion rather than grounding it in the truth. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes. I would just say that, Martin Luther King, no matter what you would talk about his like personal morals aside, and not that that's unimportant, but Martin Luther King, if you look at his actual political policies, he was in favor of affirmative action. He was in favor of democratic socialist ideals of redistributing wealth using the state and things like that. And so if he were still around today, he would be very much in favor of what we might like to call wokeness, even if it doesn't, even if he would be like, he might be more like a Jesse Jackson type of character.
There might be some aspects of it that he could find some common ground with. However, he also had other ideological commitments that would absolutely not be tolerated by the wokeists.
That might be true. Yeah, I mean, he would probably, they on the second thought, maybe they might cancel him. But in terms of like affirmative action,
I kind of think of him as like he'd be in a position, I think, a lot like J.K. Rowling. Just so you know, J.K. Rowling is not based. She made Dumbledore gay. All right.
Sorry.
So
on a t-shirt.
Yeah. So just because they don't like her doesn't make her one of the good guys. All right, or gals. But so that's the kind of position I think Dr. King would be in if he was alive today. Is he would go with them most of the way, but I think at some point he would draw back and he would find that the revolution had passed him by.
That's a lot of there's a lot of truth to that, I would say. I would also, now this is pertinent to what you guys were talking about with Marxism earlier. Worldviews of extreme skepticism or nihilism cannot be protected by freedom of speech. And this was actually pointed out by Edward Fraser, who's a Thomistic philosopher. In his article, he has an article on Substack about freedom of speech. He points out that if we understand freedom of speech as a right that exists to protect dialectic that that helps us forward the truth and moves us for the truth, then any group of people that denies that there is such a thing as truth, or engages in dialectic for reasons other than the pursuit of truth, their speech is not protected. And this is this is a radical. This is rather radical, and I would say,
I
we have to
admire
keep
the
in mind.
shiny principle, but I don't see how you could make that distinction in practice in a way that could be administered fairly.
I think it would be on his point. I think it would be I think it would be very unwise. You would have to separate the dialectical process from of Marxism, like the want for revolution and anger and violence, from the discussion. And I almost think that Marxism, because it's a kind of anti-truth, because it's a kind of decay, that to solve this by polity rather than interpersonal relation and virtue would be impossible. I think that
nobody here.
Absolutely.
I mean, I might want to point. Can I point back? Nobody here is saying that you can solve Marxism by censoring them. I'm just pointing out the purpose of this slide is just to say that those people or groups who do not who reject the idea of truth, they cannot claim freedom of speech rights. Now, you might be against censoring them for reasons other than their right to free expression, such as maybe prudence. Maybe it's not really prudent to censor the Marxists. Maybe it's more prudent in certain circumstances to dialogue with them. But they can't. They can't claim a moral right to it. Is all that this argument is suggesting.
I would agree with that. I think we can hash out the margins of that later. But yeah, I would agree with that. If it's a claim of moral right to free speech, then it can't it can't necessarily be grounded. Yeah.
Yeah. So the question of how to deal with Marxists is a completely separate one, and I would agree with you that it's not something that's entirely solvable with political solutions.
I'm not sure this principle even works, though, because we have to ask, do you have the right to express your opinion even though your opinion truly is wrong?
Yes.
Well, if the right is only to serve the truth, as argued earlier, then that wouldn't extend to if you're wrong, would it?
It would extend to the idea that the person can be wrong, but is trying to make an adequate will towards the truth. In Marxism's case, it doesn't work because Marxism is supposed to be, Marxism's exact objective is not the truth. It is.
Well,
it is
as we
evolution.
found out in the anti-communist movement of the 1950s, it's extremely difficult to really be sure who's really a Marxist and who's not.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
That's
why
that's
I
a big
argue
mess.
for
I mean,
yeah.
And about extreme skepticism, I might say that I think that David Hume was largely wrong in his conclusions, but I also think that the history of Western philosophy would be much poorer if we didn't have David Hume in it.
Oh, you guys! No, I'll refrain from saying something about this, but I do disagree with the premise that Hume was good. I would, however, argue that Hume is worth, dialoguing with. I've read both of his treatises on human.
Well, if we didn't have Hume, we'd still have a lot of other, bad guys.
Again,
but they would
like,
just be less clear.
yeah, I would just stress that it's like when we're talking about these things, we're talking about the moral right. It just means that if someone were to censor a David Hume or a Marxist, that person would not be able to appeal to their moral right to freedom of speech, because that would be an abuse. Now, someone might, however, they could claim, you could make an argument that it would be prudential not to censor them. It wouldn't be wise to censor them, but you couldn't argue in principle that it's just wrong to censor them no matter what.
Yeah. And I would say
now
that, like, yeah,
and the same thing would apply to, like, what Ben says about how you can't always you can't always tell who's who based on just on the outset. Like, can you really tell who's a Marxist if they're all hiding it? That is the case, and that again. But again, that's a matter of prudence.
I think
what I can
handling the
tell,
blasphemy question might put this whole issue we're currently discussing in a clearer light.
right? So when we're talking about blasphemy, right? And I know that all three of us come from different churches, so we're going to we might have different opinions on this, but the thing here, as a Catholic, I believe that the church is is infallible, and that we have a Bible that is inerrant, that is to say, it's without error, and therefore this is and I worship a God who is truth itself. So it just seems to me that if you are going to go against these things, if you're going to use blasphemy, if you're going to use blasphemy which is more than just disagreeing with the religion, it's actual, like, it's a verbal attack on the character of these institutions and against God himself. If you
well, let's get a specific example. Martin Luther said that the Roman Catholic Church is identified with the whore of Babylon from John the Revelator, and that was a core tenet of Lutheranism. Is that blasphemy?
It wouldn't. I would say that, like, I would argue that that was an offhand comment rather than a dogmatic claim from Lutheranism. But
I don't know about dogmatic, but you don't really get the whole story of Lutheranism without that interpretation. I really don't think you do.
Sure, yes, but it would be like saying that one, terrible offense that, Luther said, is a thing that invalidates the entirety of Luther's theology. Now, you could obviously, from our perspective, you could obviously say that because it's blasphemy, right, it should be legislated.
Well, I understand. I'm not Catholic myself, so
no, I'm Orthodox.
So yeah,
I'm kind of a disinterested third party in that regard. So,
well, I mean, I don't think Ben is. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Ben is a Protestant himself. I think,
I think he's more than, if I remember correctly.
He's part. I think.
Yeah, I come from an obscure break-off sect of the Latter-day Saints, which is having problems with not being properly organized into an actual church at the moment. So it's sort of this messed up, loose, vaguely interassociated movement. And I'm not going to stay that way, by the way, for very long. Within the next few years, either this problem is going to be fixed and there's going to be an actual church, or I'm going to be changing religions. So that's the position I'm in right now.
Of Christianity entirely, or?
Well, no, I mean, it'd be a different Christian church, which,
Fair enough.
Yeah.
But, fair enough.
But the point is, though, that if you're going to have a society that allows Protestantism, then you're either going to have to back off on your Catholic exclusive definition of blasphemy, or you're going to have to put some kind of limiting principle on that, because otherwise what you have is Catholic-Protestant war, unavoidably.
Well, what I would just say is that you can, my limiting principle here is that blasphemy, as defined by the Catholic Catechism, is speaking against God in a contemptuous, scornful, or abusive manner. And this includes, and we would include ridicule of saints, sacred objects, or of persons consecrated to God, because it's an indirect attack on God to do so. Now, when it comes to interfaith dialogue, right? Oh, this is difficult, right? But here's how I would lay it out, and how I would apply this limitation of freedom of speech with a right to freedom of religion, which is also something that I believe as a Catholic. The thing to note here is there are going to be very clear examples from our perspective of what is blasphemy. Like, for example, if somebody, I don't know, and forgive me for being harsh, calls the Virgin Mary an unkind word, like saying she is a loose woman, for example.
Yeah, pray for us, by the way.
Like if someone were to call the Virgin Mary a loose woman or something like that.
Well, that's what Joseph thought before the angel appeared to him.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. If somebody were to do that, I would consider that to be a very clear example of blasphemy, and I can appreciate that when it comes to this, denying a Protestant who denies that the church is that the Catholic Church is God's church. I would not classify that as blasphemy unless he's also going the extra step in being abusive about it,
yes,
or denigrating about it.
I would argue that there's a difference between critiquing, theology and disrespecting it and not withholding a charitable view of it. Like, in the context of this argument, we're using blasphemy as an example. If this is grounded in God, and then naturally blasphemy would not be protected as a moral right of, a free speech. However, it needs
being wrong wouldn't either, really.
Well, exactly, and I would argue that wrong, like being wrong versus doing it as an overt, willingness to tear them down rather than a theological critique and forwarding charity towards the tradition and regard for the tradition, is different than just being wrong. Like, for instance, I use this example a lot. I have a brother who is completely theologically different than me. He practices an esoteric tradition that is, not so subtle, called voodoo. And I'm an Orthodox Christian, and we have theological discussions that go quite in depth all the time. In him being wrong, I would still want to protect it based on his charity and wanting to understand my tradition and me wanting to understand his. To me, even if someone is wrong, that they are still protected by due process of wanting the truth, just disagreeing with it. And there's a distinction between that and blasphemy. Blasphemy is the overt attack, hatred, vitriol in relation to it. And obviously, this would be extremely hard to implement in any, capacity. But it certainly is a distinction that can be made.
Yeah, exactly. One thing here's another part of St. Thomas that you'd appreciate, Ben, is that not every sin can be legislated against. St. Thomas you can't, and sometimes it's more prudent to allow for certain sins to exist in order to protect the polity as a whole. This is following God, because God allows for sinners to exist, and he doesn't strike down every single person who's ever committed a sin.
Yeah, and yeah.
But going to the next slide, if I may, I think it will cover this, what you've repeated before about, what to do with people being wrong. I would argue that even people who are wrong but are sincere in pursuit of the truth would be protected by freedom of speech, as I would say. So in this slide here, I go into, if is so-called hate speech protected by free speech? And the short answer is yes. Yeah, hate speech is protected speech. The long answer is that, hate speech is protected by, is defined under a wide variety of meanings. And obviously, some understandings of hate speech would not be protected, particularly if it involves threatening people, inciting illegal action, lying about people, and so on. And those things are wrong even when just as wrong when directed against groups of people as it would be wrong to direct them against individuals, right? So, however, a lot of what is called hate speech is really just something that's expressions of unpopular truths or expressions of disparagement towards certain groups. And those things are protected under freedom of speech, simply because while it is immoral to badmouth someone or to reveal private information about someone that others have no right to know, such as what happens when you dox someone, insulting, the thing is, you do have a duty towards the truth. And if you have to hurt other people's feelings in order to make a point in an argument, then that is protected by freedom of speech. And this is actually, again, I root this in natural law when it talks about, St. Thomas talks about the vice of effeminacy, where you have some people who, so here's the thing, right? St. Thomas talks about the virtue of kindness, how we all have a duty to speak kindly to one another. However, he makes the point that it is sometimes not kind to be affirming of other people all the time. Like, if you are so kind to somebody that you're going to help them off a cliff, as to take an extreme example, or if you're so kind to somebody that you're not going to correct them when they are clearly doing something wrong.
So if you act like a large language model.
Exactly. If you act like a large language model, then you're going to, then that would be immoral, because what you're doing is affirming. Sometimes love requires something other than an attitude of affirmation. Sometimes speaking the truth requires you to say things that other people might find offensive. And here's another point that I would like to bring up. Sometimes people, you'll hear that, certain speech is offensive, certain things are offensive. But I think David S. Otterberg pointed out there's not a lot of these people who talk about offensive speech. They don't really go the extra mile in distinguishing between speech that is actually offensive and speech that feels offensive. Like, sometimes people will take offense at things that aren't actually offensive. And usually because they're very sensitive people, generally. Like, in that case, the correct attitude to have towards them is to just say, you need tougher skin, basically, because you're way too sensitive towards this, and you're overreacting to the speech. And obviously, people are going to disagree on where those lines are, but I think everybody on all sides agrees that there is that distinction. And so to
I have an argument that I think I could ground the distinction in if you want to hear it.
oh yes, that would be very helpful because I don't go into any detail about that, but because otherwise, because the slide just goes on, that would make things go really long. If I tried to,
I won't go into too much detail. I promise. It's
Mhm.
it's just the I would argue that the distinction lies not in the is like not in the offensiveness of it per se, but in the intent of the offensive word. Is it to actually engage substantially with the discussion, or does it go into fallacy, like ad hominem or slander or something like that? Then I would argue that the offensiveness of something, like somebody should rightly be offended if someone, commits an act of slander or ad hominem in relation to a subject. But if no matter how diabolical the subject is, right, I think that there should be discussion on it substantively, and those distinctions, that I think is the distinction.
Could I offer
Okay.
what might not be the most constructive critique, but it would be real simple.
Okay.
I really think that we should not be adopting this term hate speech at all. I think that
Fair enough.
it's the enemy's term. They have made it in order to engage in language manipulation and narrative control. And so for us to just assume that it is a valid concept is, I think, surrendering way too much ground to them.
Okay.
And one thing I would suggest is that if you must use the term, I think it's best to type it as a newspeak term so that there is no space in between hate and speech, so that it becomes like one of the terms out of Orwell's 1984. It isn't hate speech, it's hate speech. It's just like wrongthink. And and getting people to think of the term that way, because that's what they're using. That's how they use it.
I mean, I put it in quotations marks because, like I said, when I was doing research, I found very plainly there are multiple definitions of hate speech, and they all seem to contradict one another.
It's elastic. It means whatever the person speaking wants to mean at the moment. It's whatever speech they hate. And there's no consistency on it at all. And that's why I think that it's the best approach to that, in my view, is just to go back to whatever societal standards you had before that term was introduced, and then try and talk about those. Because I think that even engaging with this concept of hate speech, in my opinion, is kind of a dead end.
I kind of deconstructed in the first bullet point. A lot of what is bad about so-called hate speech already had a name in prior tradition: slander, defamation, incitement, scandal, things like that.
Those are all, much better terms, I think.
I think hate speech doesn't add anything other than maybe an intent behind it, but I don't think that it needs to be its own concept, simply because, and I think it is harmful that it's become its own concept, which is why if you have to bring it, but I bring it up here because it's an argument against my position from the left. And so here's one other thing, right? I also go into other arguments when we likewise to claim that some speech should be banned because it upholds some privileged position is also wrong. Whether or not some position upholds the power of the privileged has no bearing on whether it's true or not. And the reason why I bring that up is because that is the origin of what we would call hate speech. Like if you look at Herbert Marcuse in his speech on repressive tolerance, this is exactly the argument he gives for depriving conservatives of their rights. He basically says that you people having rights deprives the lower class, the working class, of its rights. Basically, you having rights upholds a system and prevents revolution from happening. And so until the revolution happens, we won't have tolerance. We're going to have intolerance towards right-wingers. That's what he basically writes in Repressive Tolerance. And I take that to be the origin of a lot of the modern woke ideology surrounding this concept.
Marcuse
And the critical
right?
theorists.
Yes.
Yeah, I could tell. It made sense because what he just did in that reasoning is dialectic. Like, that's what it is. It uses the idea that because it represses this group of people, regardless of the truth or the axioms related to it, then it is able to justify a notoriously evil premise, which is, yeah, let's repress these people. We can shoot them, we can kill them, etc. And that I think was the distinction I made earlier. That's all I wanted to say.
Right.
Well,
and lastly, I would.
Sorry.
Yeah. Lastly, I would just say that on this slide that some speech is labeled misinformation, but that some speech is mislabeled as misinformation by some scientific or political body is not grounds to ban it either. Such bodies, unlike the church, are not infallible. So when we're talking about probabilistic claims, right? Things like whether there is such a thing as climate change, or whether whether free market capitalism versus like some kind of mixed market system is valid. Those are probabilistic claims. Those are things that can be discussed, even if you think that one body or one person or another is wrong, or maybe even obviously wrong. The fact is that it's not. There isn't some kind of infallible body that can declare by fiat from God that this is totally wrong. This is totally this is against what the.
I thought you were
everything.
Catholic. So if you're Catholic, then it's the Roman Catholic Church.
I don't think the Catholic Church has the authority to declare whether there is such a thing as climate change. It's just like that's a probabilistic scientific.
What would you decide if future popes disagreed?
Because it's not made ex cathedra and it can't be.
It literally can't be. The Catholic Church. Okay, so what the Catholic Church could do is say polluting the environment is wrong. Like, it could say that polluting the environment is wrong, for example. It can't weigh in on a probabilistic scientific matter, like whether climate change is real or not, and say that you have to believe this or else you're not part of the faith. But it can say things like climate change, polluting the environment is wrong and immoral. It's a matter of because that's a matter of morals. The Catholic Church has the authority to make infallible statements on matters of faith and morals, not on matters of probabilistic empirical science.
Okay, I don't know if the I would say that empirical science always concerns questions of fact and not morals, so that's clear. But where to draw the line between matters of faith and matters of science is certainly a lot more blurry.
I mean, let me put it to you this way: do you think that how could it be a matter of faith that, for example, there is such a thing as climate change?
Oh, it most certainly is treated as a matter of faith and a religion by millions of people who believe in it and take all kinds of actions and make all kinds of claims based on it.
Okay, but it's like, where is that in the Bible?
Well, I mean, if we're talking about faith, we're talking about its epistemological status.
But
And
when we
so
talk, we're talking about
for a lot
faith.
of people. Oh,
Yeah, but it's when we're talking about in the Catholic sense of faith, we're talking about something that's derived either from sacred tradition or sacred scripture,
This is
the orally or written word of God, the oral or
I
written word of God.
thought you meant faith as in faith versus knowledge as being its epistemological status. So that I didn't understand what you meant by faith.
Okay,
Okay.
fair enough. Okay, yeah. So when I'm talking about faith, it's like that's what I was kind of confusing for me because I don't see how you can get from like sacred scripture or from the teachings of the apostles that the earth is going to experience a global warming in the 20th century. That doesn't really. I don't see how you could.
You mean
Get that.
21st, but yeah, and I might say I really don't like this term global warming not global warming, excuse me. I don't like this term climate change because you can't test climate change. You can test warming because if cooling happened, that would disprove the warming. But you can't test climate change because the climate's always going to change.
Oh, yeah, Valor had to go, but thank
Oh
you
yeah, I'm
for
proud.
coming on. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's,
did we get to the end of your slides?
fair. Like there were still like 6 more,
Oh,
unfortunately.
yikes. Yeah, you kind of have to time these things out if you're going to do slides. Maybe
Yeah,
we could
I
come
should
back
have.
for the rest of them sometime.
I'm planning on finishing up, and then like you don't have to stick around for the full
Oh,
time,
okay.
but
You actually are going to stick on today. Oh, okay.
yeah, I'm going to finish up, and then like you don't have
All
to
right.
be around for the whole time, but
All right. Well, I might have a few more comments later, but I better let you get through more of this rather than going over every little thing, you know?
okay, yeah. Well, the next few slides are going to be about like just laying out a war thesis. And the thesis is that open dialogue is a Western tradition that goes back to Plato and Socrates. It's the method. This is the method that begins in classical philosophy and was taken up by early Christian apologists and then institutionalized in the medieval university system. And it's coexisted with like even within context with censorship, this idea has existed throughout this time, and we have you begin with the the birth of the Socratic method, the idea of questioning, probing definitions, and testing assumptions. It's the idea that the unexamined life is not worth living. It lies at the heart of that is the pursuit of truth. Plato's epistemology relies on Socratic dialogue as the means to determine opinion from truth. And Aristotle, although he had a more empiricist epistemology, relatively speaking, did a lot of work in systematizing dialectic and talking about rhetorical traps and fallacies. And this actually influenced classical antiquity in Greek and Roman public life, and the early Christians deliberately adopted the Greco-Roman debate tradition. And you might see this in like Saint Justin Martyr, for example. So Saint Justin Martyr wrote a book called The Dialogue with Trypho, which is very similar to a Socratic dialogue, and it's probably written very self-consciously in that mode, because before he became a Christian, Justin Martyr was a pagan philosopher, and it records his debate against a Jew in a very Socratic fashion about the messianic nature of Christ. And Christians later are institutionalizing disputation through the university system. Like, for example, Peter Abelard, who wrote a series of sentences that were that, and then he encourages his students to critique those sentences and see how what is true and what is not from them. And it's so, and this continues into the Renaissance and Enlightenment era. By the way, it's like that is part of it. Now, what changes? Well, modernity is actually built on rejecting reasoned discourse, and you find this firstly in someone like Niccolo Machiavelli, and it's applied primarily to religious authorities. So Machiavelli views religion as a method of instilling fear and discipline, and therefore he views religious truth claims, such as prophecy and divine command, as just masks for power. And then you have Enlightenment thinkers like Spinoza following suit. Spinoza, being a Jew, he takes a look at the Old Testament and argues for basically disregarding any of the truth claims of any kind of divinity. Instead, analyzes things in terms of what kind of social and political impact does this have, and then you see the culmination of this trend in the Masters of Suspicion, as there was this one philosopher, Ricoeur, I believe, who he talks about Karl Marx, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Sigmund Freud. And what they did was what their philosophies do is shift away from examining the merits of an argument to more towards looking at the motives of the speaker. So for Karl Marx, ideas are just epiphenomena of the economic system. And what you argue for is always just an expression of your class interests. With Friedrich Nietzsche, it's all about the will to power, and everything else is just a mask for that. With Sigmund Freud, he's arguing about same deal, but he's arguing about unconscious desires. Your rational ideas are really rationalizations for unconscious desires that you have. And so by shifting the debate from reasoned disputation to unmasking hidden motives, you create this widespread cynicism of debate itself that you find even among like right wingers now. You might have noticed within right wing circles the idea that debate doesn't matter, doesn't really do anything, and it's no wonder that it doesn't do anything when you have entire sections of the population who have been influenced by Karl Marx, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Sigmund Freud, because their ideas actually undermine rational discourse, and they don't see the utility of debate as a means to obtain truth. They see the utility of debate as unmasking hidden causes, trying to uncover the hidden motives behind the argument.
Well, a lot of this you get just from Machiavelli alone.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with critiquing this as as bad, which is perfectly understandable for you to be doing, but the problem with critiquing it as bad is that in the rough and tumble real world of politics, Machiavellian tactics work. That's just a fact. That's not even an opinion. Now you can say they're bad all day long, but either you will adopt them in some degree or you will not have political power. Those are your options.
I disagree with that. I think Machiavelli was not only wrong, but he was also not just in like a spiritual sense, but he was also just plain wrong about politics generally. Like, I don't think Machiavellian tactics even work.
Well, I mean, I think that if you look at our world today, they sure seem to.
What do you? I mean,
you look at somebody like. I mean, not only do the Marxist types use it all the time, use Machiavelli all the time, but Trump absolutely does. And I mean, with Trump, it really isn't so much about what actually is true and right. It's more about what is the best deal that you can make. That's how Trump operates, and I mean, it works. That's managed to win over and over in our political system and in relations between nations. I think that the challenge for a philosopher is to identify what is it about these tactics that separate the good from the bad in them, because I don't think it's simply all bad to have something like Sun Tzu's Art of War that isn't interested in higher truth, but is just interested in what is effective. There's some truth to that as well, so I think you have to sort out what's good and what's bad from it, and not just completely throw it out, because when it works, you kind of are stuck by that in the real world.
But you notice that the way you lay it out kind of undermines itself, right? Because if you have let's confine this to freedom of speech, right, and rational discourse. If you have a situation where all the different actors in a political discussion, they're not out for what is really true, which is supposedly what Machiavelli is after, right? He wants to get at what is rather than what ought to be, what we think we ought to be. But if everybody is going around not discussing what actually is true on the ground, but rather they're too busy trying to expose whatever secret hidden causes are behind and trying to unmask the hidden motives of every speaker without regard for the truth, then how can you actually get to the truth?
Well, I think that when it comes to politics and governance, the truth is always important in every sphere where humans exist. But there are limits because there does come a point where other considerations come in front of truth. Like for instance, an example of a situation in which another consideration comes in front of truth. The need to protect people from getting blown up by nuclear bombs might be a little more important than the truth of how to make a nuclear bomb. You know what I mean? Like,
okay, but is that true?
Like, there's certain.
But is that true?
Yeah.
Okay, well then the truth doesn't actually. Then the truth isn't actually secondary to that consideration, because it is true. Because it is just true that we don't want people to learn about how to make nuclear bombs.
Yeah. Well, but when you get to the second order question, that's a different question. In the first order question, there are times when other considerations are more important than knowing the truth. That's my point.
Look, right. Let me put it to you this way: using the modern method, where the Machiavellian Spinozist modern method of using debates to expose hidden motives and like going after the attacking the man rather than the argument, that can win debates. It's not going and but that doesn't actually get you to the truth. And so
Yeah.
if you really, and this is why I would say Machiavelli, he selectively applied this to religious figures in order to demystify them. He didn't apply that method around the board. Same with Spinoza. He only applied this to figures in the Bible in order to push for a liberal secular worldview. Someone like Marx or Nietzsche or Freud, they start applying it to more and more aspects of life until you reach the postmodern era where it's applied universally to everything. And that actually, and what we have to understand is that method is kind of a universal solvent. I think what I would just say is, if you shift the focus of the debate from the merits of the argument towards underlying social, psychological, and historical explanations, that actually doesn't work towards getting to the truth, and it actually just makes people cynical about debates to begin with. And I think the solution to that is to relegate the hermeneutics of suspicion, that method, towards it. I would suggest relegating that to sort of a secondary position.
Okay.
So I get sorry, I got through this all, but is there anybody who, if anybody in the comment section has any questions or anything, please let me know, right? And Ben, it's been really good to have you on again. Are there any other questions or comments that you have?
Well, we didn't get to this topic, unfortunately, which I kind of wanted us to get to, but maybe some other time, really. But I was going to talk about the emergence of this sort of cancel culture on the right, and the problem of, on the one hand, protecting civil society from dissolution, but on the other hand, the problem of collateral damage when trying to do that. That's really the issue of the moment, as I see it, because that's what this response to the Charlie Kirk shooting has been, is that the people celebrating it need to get fired, and they're like, oh well, that's cancel culture, So that seems to be the issue we're dealing with at the moment. So I might suggest maybe we could come back to that another time. If you wanted to do another one of these, I'd suggest that as a topic. Anyways, thanks so much for hosting, and I gave you some pushback. I hope I didn't totally ruin anything.
No, this was good. I guess, if I had to give just an offhand comment, off the cuff comment on this, I would just say that following the principles that I laid out here, I would just relegate the cancel culture, as we might call it, to people who make comments related to explicit acts of violence or slander. So I would just say that, as a rule of thumb, if you have people saying that Charlie Kirk's death was justified and that we need to have more of it, I would say that those people are the ones the cancel mob needs to go after. That's just my opinion, though.
Yeah, we can't really live in the same cities and work at the same companies with people who are going to promote that. That's just the death of the civil society right there. On the other hand, there's all these edge cases, and the mob the mob mentality seems to be to just treat everybody the same, and that's actually become a genuine problem. I think of Stephen King, the famous horror author. he is a left-wing asshole. Let's be clear. But see, what happened was the other day he got online and he posted something saying, well, you know, Charlie Kirk said it was okay to stone gays. And he had posted that because he had seen somebody else online claiming it and he believed it. And then he gets off Twitter for 24 hours. And then he comes back and sees what a disaster that was. And he goes, oh, and he deletes that post and he apologizes. He says, look, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. That is incorrect. Charlie Kirk never said that. I was wrong. You guys were right. I'm sorry. And the mob won't let it go. Even though he just completely admitted he was wrong and apologized and said that that was just wrong. They won't let it go. They act like he's just like all the people who were celebrating Kirk's death and they're trying to get his books canceled and all this stuff, even though he's come out and publicly said, look, I made a mistake. I believed something that wasn't true because I saw it online. And I mean, which of us hasn't done that?
Yes.
You know what I mean? And so people like that are getting caught in the crosshairs here. And that's what we have to be really careful about. On the other hand, the fact of collateral damage is being used to try to quash the entire effort to clean up our society. And our society does need this cleanup. But what's going to happen now is going to be kind of messy. You know, it's not going to be perfect. Things have gotten too bad for a nice, clean, fix.
That's always the problem with like relying on this kind of mob mentality. Again, the only solution I would have is the only solution I can see is that the state takes the lead on this. We can't rely on like disaggregated mobs going after people. That actually doesn't. That actually has historically had bad consequences.
Well, yeah. What's happening is this is a pushback that the right wing is doing against or trying to influence what I'd call the real government. And by the real government, I mean to include the United States government, but also to include corporate America, because the real government is whoever has power over you. That's your real government. And that's where we're trying to get action. It is, is in the real government. Because if the First Amendment says you have freedom of speech, but Mark Zuckerberg says you don't, and all the people you're trying to influence only read what's controlled by Mark Zuckerberg, then you really don't have freedom of speech at all. So, there's the government and then there's the real government. And this is something we're trying to get done in the real government.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. I definitely enjoyed having you on.
All right. Sorry, I'm rambling.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Look, we are entering into a new phase of politics, and it's going to be very difficult. And I'm hoping, I'm hoping to God that nothing bad comes out of it. And maybe that's, you might say that's naive of me to do that, but
yeah,
I want to believe that that God will help what is good prevail ultimately.
Yeah, let's pray for that, and that the thing Charlie Kirk I know would most be wanted to be remembered for is his Christian faith. That was more important than any of the politics.
Amen. All right. Yeah, and now that. So if anybody here wants to subscribe to any of our channels, I'm going to link them. I'm going to pin a comment that links to my guests' YouTube channels, Substacks, whatever, so that you can go and subscribe to them, follow them there. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. And I wish all of you a good night. Have a nice day.
Good night.